The year was 1346, and England stood at the height of one of its greatest military campaigns in northern France. While England celebrated its victories overseas, another danger emerged much closer to home: the unyielding Scots. For decades, France and Scotland had been bound together by the Old Alliance, an agreement that promised mutual assistance whenever England invaded either kingdom. With Edward III and much of England's professional army campaigning in France, Scotland saw an opportunity that seemed impossible to ignore. King David II of Scotland, the son of the legendary Robert the Bruce, believed England had been left vulnerable. If Scotland invaded northern England, Edward might be forced to abandon his campaign in France, relieving pressure on the French crown. But if Edward chose not to return, much of northern England would be left exposed and ripe for conquest. A win-win scenario from the Scottish perspective. By early October, King David II had assembled an army of roughly 12,000 men, including experienced spearmen, Highland warriors, mounted nobles, archers, troops from across Scotland, and even French knights and cavalry, led by several of the kingdom's most prominent nobles. Well equipped and organized into powerful schiltron formations, the Scots invaded Northumberland, capturing castles and devastating the countryside around Hexham and Corbridge. Confident that England would offer little resistance, King David pressed forward, only to discover he had badly underestimated his enemy. The English responded in kind to this threat. The defense of northern England fell largely to Lord Ralph Neville. He organized local levies from Yorkshire, Lancashire, Cumberland, Durham, and Northumberland. Veterans who had fought in France joined local knights and experienced longbowmen. The English army probably numbered around 7,000 men, though estimates vary. Many English soldiers had recently returned from Edward III's campaigns in France. More importantly, they were experienced in warfare and understood precisely how to fight. Their confidence had been strengthened by victories at Duplin Moor, Halidon Hill, and, most recently, the magnificent triumph at Crecy, just 7 weeks earlier. The English intended to capitalize on the superiority of their longbowmen and disciplined infantry to offset their numerical disadvantage on the battlefield. Lord Ralph Neville sought to bring the Scots to battle as quickly as possible, giving them little time to develop a coherent strategy. He sent forward his veteran longbowmen to skirmish against the Scottish lines. Scottish archers marched out to meet them on the open field. Near the center of the battlefield, the two groups of archers came within range of one another. The English archers were undoubtedly better trained than their Scottish counterparts. They wielded the powerful longbow, typically made from yew, which required years of dedicated training to master. However, once perfected, it provided them with a significant advantage in range, power, and rate of fire. A chaotic exchange of arrows soon filled the sky. Deadly volleys rained down upon both sides, striking any unfortunate soldier caught in the crossfire. After only a few minutes, the superiority of the English longbow began to show. The devastating power of their weapons inflicted heavy casualties, reportedly killing Scottish archers at a rate of roughly 4 to 1. The contest was ultimately decided, and the surviving Scottish archers retreated behind the safety of their main battle line. King David II recognized a promising opportunity to strike at the exposed English archers in the open field. He ordered forward his cavalry contingents, hoping to ride them down before they could escape to the protection of the English formation. However, the English longbowmen were no fools. Having achieved their objective of crippling the Scottish archers, they quickly withdrew back behind their own lines, escaping just moments before the Scottish-French cavalry could reach them. Unable to reach their target in time, the Scottish-French cavalry remained undeterred and continued their charge. Aside from a handful of mounted knights serving as their lord's personal bodyguards, the English had no cavalry contingents of their own with which to counter the enemy horsemen. Instead, the English infantry at the front of the line, armed with spears, poleaxes, and bills, braced themselves to receive the full force of the oncoming cavalry charge. In a disciplined display of courage and professional soldiery, the English infantry lowered their weapons and stood ready to meet the assault. These battle-hardened veterans held their ground and absorbed the charge with remarkable effectiveness. Rider after rider was hurled from the saddle as charging men and horses crashed headlong into a forest of spearheads and polearms. Meanwhile, English longbowmen positioned on the flanks and behind the main line enjoyed a clear field of fire. They unleashed devastating volleys of arrows that ripped through the Scottish-French cavalry. Unable to break the steadfast English line and suffering appalling casualties, the surviving horsemen quickly lost all momentum before finally turning and fleeing the battlefield in complete rout. Lord Ralph Neville had eliminated the Scots' greatest advantage on the battlefield. His longbowmen were now free to harass the Scottish lines with impunity. King David II understood that without his cavalry and archers, his infantry would be left exposed to relentless English arrow fire. The young Scottish king was left with two choices: retreat, regroup his forces, and preserve the bulk of his army, or commit to battle immediately. He chose the latter. Whether that decision stemmed from pride, inexperience, overconfidence, or simply the belief that his numerical superiority still favored him, remains a matter of historical debate. The Scottish infantry advanced beneath a relentless hail of English arrows. Soldier after soldier fell before they could even reach the English line. Yet those who survived and clashed with the enemy struck with tremendous force. The Scottish schiltrons proved formidable, their long pikes outreaching the English spears, bills, and polearms, allowing them to push the English front ranks backward. The problem, however, was that only the leading ranks of the Scottish formations carried these formidable pikes. The men behind them were primarily close combat infantry, unable to exploit the schiltron's greatest strength. The English, by contrast, still possessed a fresh reserve of heavily armored men-at-arms, battle-hardened veterans who excelled in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Once the English front line had fixed the Scottish pikes in place, the reserves surged through the gaps and crashed into the flanks and exposed sections of the schiltrons. Forced into close-quarters fighting, where their long pikes became cumbersome and ineffective, the Scottish formations quickly lost the very advantage upon which they had relied. The battle soon descended into a desperate melee. As the Scottish formations began to lose cohesion, the disciplined English steadily gained the upper hand, driving their opponents back through relentless pressure and superior battlefield coordination. The English archers began firing into the Scottish ranks at relatively close range. While Scottish armor protected many of the nobles, the relentless arrow fire disrupted formations and inflicted steady casualties among the infantry. A breakthrough soon occurred on the English left flank. The Scottish right flank, commanded by the Earl of Moray, was gradually forced backward as English men-at-arms tore through their ranks, ultimately resulting in a full-scale rout. Moray himself was killed during the struggle. With Moray's division destroyed, the Scottish centre under King David II became dangerously exposed as English infantry began striking from the flank. Meanwhile, the division commanded by Scottish noble William Douglas struggled to make meaningful progress against the English position. English longbowmen continued firing into exposed formations whenever opportunities arose, while English men-at-arms exploited the gaps beginning to appear throughout the Scottish battle line. As the pressure mounted, the Scottish formations began to collapse. Douglas's flank lost cohesion, and although Scottish nobles attempted to rally their retreating soldiers, confusion quickly spread throughout the army, eventually developing into a mass rout. Thousands of Scottish soldiers fled northward, leaving King David II and his remaining forces isolated in the center of the battlefield. The English right flank now advanced, nearly surrounding David and his men. Casualties continued to mount, yet the Scottish centre fought on with remarkable determination. King David II refused to abandon the battlefield, and his remaining soldiers stood beside him despite the desperate situation. Whether this was the result of courageous resolve, or simply because they had become trapped with no avenue of retreat, remains uncertain. By this stage, however, the outcome was inevitable. The Scottish centre was completely outnumbered, overwhelmed, and on the verge of destruction. According to contemporary accounts, the courageous King David continued fighting even after suffering 2 arrow wounds to the face, one of which reportedly struck near his jaw. Despite his injuries, David continued to resist, but he was eventually forced to accept that the battle was lost. He attempted to escape the battlefield with a small group of loyal retainers. However, according to contemporary sources, the Scottish king was soon discovered and captured. The Battle of Neville's Cross ended in a devastating defeat for Scotland, with estimates of 1,000 to 3,000 Scots killed, many nobles captured, and King David II taken prisoner by the English. David remained in English captivity for 11 years, creating a severe political crisis in Scotland. His eventual release in 1357 was secured through the Treaty of Berwick, which required Scotland to pay a massive ransom of 100,000 marks, placing an enormous financial burden on the kingdom. For England, the victory was strategically significant. It neutralized the Scottish threat for more than a decade and allowed Edward III to focus his attention on his ongoing campaigns in France.